Hello, class. I'm happy to spend a little bit of time with you. Today, I'm going to be analyzing Joyce Miyamoto's poem called Asian American. Okay. And just like always, anytime we're doing something that is about sociopolitical awareness or any kind of social justice issue or equity issue, you need to make sure that you have your thickest skin on, and you are aware of any potential triggers that you may experience. And this poem certainly does have some issues that may cause a little bit of anxiety. So just a little bit of heads up for you. Malcolm X was known for saying, look, history isn't hate. And just because if you stabbed me and pulled the knife out a little bit, don't expect me to be grateful for that. So it's just kind of along those lines as far as, just be aware that there are times where the human experience doesn't have everything with rainbows and butterflies, and that's certainly true here. So what I would like you to do is have in front of you the poem called Asian American. And I'm going to share my screen with you for a moment so that you can see what I'm talking about. This is the poem. You should have a copy of it in front of you. We have it available in our course. So it's called Asian American. And I would also like you to have in front of you the classism, racism chart. I'm looking at mine, but yours looks like this. So I have it a little bit expanded here, but it says racism, classism. And what I'm really interested in here are these categories across the top. These are the levels of society that we analyze. And so with the internalized, it means it's within me, or any individual. With the individual interpersonal, there we're talking about me, an individual person, and maybe my interactions with another person. It could be between neighbors. It's something at a very micro level. With the societal and cultural, there we're looking at much larger meso or macro levels of society. So hopefully you've heard those terms before in other courses, maybe some sociology courses, you would pick those up. So we're looking at societal and cultural. When we're talking about that, we're talking about images, beliefs, values, symbols, things that are shared at this kind of macro level of society. How do we know, like, what is deemed good, true, and beautiful in our society? And those kind of things come at the cultural level. Institutional level, though, that's also at the macro level. So we're going to be analyzing those levels with this poem, and we'll talk about the implications of that in a minute. So let me go back to our poem here. And you'll see that I have these little dots written in here. And normally if I'm in person and doing this with people, even on Zoom, but we're on synchronously, then I will have a different reader change at every of those little bullets. But with this one, since it's just me right now, I'm going to go ahead and read it. But you read along with your copy. And as you're reading, I'd like you to try just to attempt it. Don't worry if you're not sure, but we're going to be looking for these categories: internalized, individual, interpersonal, societal, cultural, and institutional. Those are the categories we're going to look for. And as soon as we do one, I'm sure you'll pick it up real quick. Okay, so let me put on my reading glasses and let's do this. Okay, Asian American by Joyce Miyamoto. When I was young, kids used to ask me, "What are you?" I'd tell them what my mom told me. "I'm American." Chin, chin, Chinaman. "You're a Jap." Flashing hot inside, I'd go home. My mom would say, "Don't worry, he who walks alone walks faster." People kept asking me, "What are you?" And I would always answer, "I'm an American." And they'd say, "No, what nationality?" "I'm an American. That's where I was born." Flashing hot inside. And when I tell them what they wanted to know, "Japanese." "Oh, I've been to Japan." I'd get it over with so they could catalog and file me, pigeonhole me, so they'd know just how to think of me. Priding themselves, they could guess the difference between Japanese and Chinese. They had me wishing I was what I'd been seeing in the movies and on TV, on billboards and in magazines. And I tried. While they were making laws in California against us owning lands, we were trying to be American. And the laws against us intermarrying with white people, we were trying to be American. When they put us in concentration camps, we were trying to be American. Our people volunteered to fight against their own country, trying to be American. When they dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we were still trying. Finally, we made it. Most of our parents fiercely dedicated to give us a good education, to give us everything they never had. We made it. Now they use us as examples to the blacks and browns, how we made it, how we overcame. But there was always someone asking me, "What are you?" Now I answer, "I'm Asian." And they say, "Why do you want to be, why do you want to separate yourselves?" Now I say, "I'm Japanese." And they say, "Don't you know this is the greatest country in the world?" Now I say, "In America, I'm part of the third world people." And they say, "If you don't like it here, why don't you go back?" Okay. All right. So what I always like to do with poetry is I like to read it the first time just for the sheer value and enjoyment of the language. I don't try to dissect it. I don't try to do anything but enjoy the language. I think especially when we're working with children, with whether they're adults or I'm sorry, whether they're close to being adults, if they're like in high school or middle school, and even if they're the little ones. I used to teach kindergarten. Um, what I like to do is help them to just simply enjoy language. Language is powerful. Language is beautiful. And so the first go around, I try to do that. If I had more time with you, I would go ahead and we would just read it again, because the first time we just read it for enjoyment. The second time we're going to go through it and we're going to start looking at it and really start thinking, well, what are the pieces here? What's going on? But poetry is a really good way to teach fluency in any kind of literacy. Even if students are primary English speakers, it's a great way to teach fluency. If people are learning English as a second language, that is a good way. If you have a poem in another language, say it's in Spanish, that's a very good way. If somebody's acquiring Spanish as a second language, or whatever language it is, if you have a poem in that, it's usually something that they can pick up on. So, but we're looking at it here from the perspective of what does it mean to be exemplary? What does it mean to have teaching and learning that is exemplary? We want to promote high levels of academic achievement, high levels of cultural competency, and the high levels of socio-political awareness. And that's usually the trickiest one for teachers to get their heads around. So the reason that I asked you to have both of these in front of you is because we're going to use the chart here and its categories to start analyzing the poem. And the reason I want you to analyze this poem is because then you are going to go and you will be analyzing case studies, lesson plans, materials. This is your perspective that an exemplary teacher would come at a poem or any kind of curricular content or any kind of interaction. They're going to come at it with these kind of understandings to bear on it. Okay, so when let's just go back to the beginning, and we're looking at a different kind of experience here. So just like with the Butterflies Girl story, we know that this is diverse. We already did our diversity and difference activity, so we know that we can't be different by ourselves. We're always different from something. So when we look at Asian American, even right there, that's a telltale sign, because I don't need the Asian part. If it says American, what is the unspoken in the United States? You didn't create this. I didn't create this. This was in place generations before we were born, where when we say American, the unspoken is white. And the reason I know that is because we always add these other parts here, Asian American, Mexican American, we add those, African American, we add those on, but the default for American is white European American. So that's what the default is. So we have a poem here that is, quote, diverse. It's different. It's different from what? It's different from the white mainstream. And so whenever we're saying, well, I'm going to start including more diversity, diversity from what? Difference from what? It's diverse from the mainstream white Euro-American canon. And so our title shows us right off the bat, Asian American, that we are departing from the Euro-American white mainstream tradition, right off the bat. Okay, so Joyce is telling her experience here. She says, when I was young, kids used to ask me, what are you? Now, right there, the very first question, what are you? That speaks to that normative standard of white European as what American means, right? They wouldn't ask her that if they didn't think that she was some deviation of white American. What are you? They're trying to place her. Remember, our identities are like a shortcut to a cheat sheet on how we should know how to treat somebody. And don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. Our functioning in our mind, we have these kind of shortcuts in our mind as human beings, not because we're bad people, but because our brains are so amazing that we're taking in all of this input constantly. Every second, we're getting all of this from our senses, and we can't pay attention to everything at once. And so our brain tries to tell us, well, this is a priority or this isn't. So when I'm sitting here, I can feel the wind coming from off of my fan circulating here. I know that there's things going on outside of my window, but I'm choosing to focus on one task. So my brain is kind of backgrounding all of these other sensory things, which would be a good thing if I was being chased by a bear, right? I wouldn't want to pause and be like, well, that air seems just right. It's not too strong. It's not too weak. I'm feeling cool. I need to get gone because the bear is chasing me, right? So our functioning in our mind is actually a good thing. So our brain will do this with identities. We look at people, and if you couldn't tell and you were like, I don't know how I don't know how this person expresses their gender. Do they identify as male? Do they identify as female? And we have kind of a mini crisis, because this is our cheat sheet to knowing how to interact with each other. If we're not sure, we don't know how to interact with them. We're like, because it makes a difference if we interact, if we see them being a man or if we see them be a woman. We might not think that we do, but if we're unsure, then suddenly we're like, oh, I don't know what to do. So then it becomes very apparent. We take all these things for granted because they're operating at the back of our minds, and we learn them being socialized from the time that we're very small. We learn because our parents and the adults around us say, don't say that. Yes, say thank you. So we're being socialized. What are the norms in our society? And so thus we know how to act like competent adults. So a lot of that's in our background. So our identities are the same thing. And it's not necessarily a bad thing to be looking at someone and our brain goes into, I'm trying to file through and figure out who you are, what you are. I'm trying to understand it. The only reason that it becomes bad is that sometimes in our society, we have historically associated any difference as deviance. And so it isn't like it's just a buffet of, whoa, everything's wonderful. Actually, you get treated differently, and those minimize your opportunities. And so difference in and of itself isn't bad. It's bad how we have historically treated differences. So as a woman, there's nothing inherently bad about you seeing that I'm a woman. What ends up being bad is that I'm being paid less for the same kind of labor, and that you see a lot of women in these pink colored jobs, and they are also the lower status and the lower paid jobs. That's where it really matters. So identity matters. And so so Joyce is saying that, she's being confronted. People are asking her, what are you? And Asian Americans have had this experience where, as a group, the Pan Asian experience is that we have had Asian groups in the United States for many, many generations, but they're always seen as the foreigners, even though you have many Asian descent people who have been born here and their grandparents have been born here, and even their great grandparents have been born here. So they are as American as anybody, but they don't get to go by the American. That it's always the Asian American. So you see that issue of identity right there. Okay, so the kids are interacting. When I was young, kids used to ask me, what are you? And so she answers them. She says, I tell them what my mom told me. I'm an American, right? She was born here. I'm an American. Now, what happens? Kids pick up on what happens with larger society. Remember, I told you to have your trigger warning? Well, here's the reason why, right? So these are pejorative terms that historically were used to demean Asian Americans, okay, and Asian descent people. These kind of words right here. You know, I can remember my grandfather who was an adult during World War II. He wouldn't get into my car when he needed to go to the doctor because I drove a Japanese, I still do, I drive a Toyota. I've driven a Toyota. And so, you know, so he would say things like that because he had come through that era of Pearl Harbor. Okay, so now flashing hot inside. So she knows that they mean to hurt her when they're saying these pejorative terms, and children pick them up. They know what kind of weapons to wield against people. So right here, flashing hot inside. Okay, I'm going over to my chart. This is something that's happening inside of her. She understands that the message being given to her is that she should feel bad, and she does, right? They are sending a message to her, and they are intentionally doing that, and the message is received, and we know that she feels bad because it says flashing hot inside. Okay, so this is internalized. She understands that larger society has these, and these children that are saying this to her on their way home, they didn't get that out of nowhere. Okay, they picked that up, and they're picking that up from this societal cultural here. So they know that those kind of images and terms and meanings, they know that that is hurtful, and they're deploying that on purpose. So they got that from the societal level, and she understands that too. She's internalized that. So right away you can kind of see where we're going with this, right? Where kind of like with the butterfly girl, where it's like message received, you know, I've got to choose how I'm going to respond to this. I'm going to either fight you, those are fighting words because I got to defend my dignity as a human being, or I'm going to be like, well, I guess you're right. And I'm going to start subtracting me because clearly the message sent and received is that I am not enough. Okay, so she knows that. So she goes home, and her mom tells her how to handle this. So this is an interpersonal. It's no longer just inside of her. She actually shares her feelings with her mom, and her mom knows this as well. Her mom's aware of these kind of cultural societal norms that are circulating out there. She's seen images of that. She's heard those things. Those kids didn't pick that up from nowhere, right? And the mom knows this. And so the mom tells her, gives her some strategies of how to handle it. So this is at this interpersonal level right here, an individual level. We're talking about one little girl and one mom. And, you know, so we can talk about the individual and the interpersonal level right there. At that kind of micro level. So the mom gives her a strategy, and the mom says, don't worry, he who walks alone walks faster. So you know, they're teasing you on the way home, you know, kind of stiff upper lip, you know, come on, get, you know, don't internalize that, push back. That is not you. You are enough. So the mom is trying to help her daughter to understand that, you know, even if she's being discriminated against, even if there's some bias being enacted against her, that you resist that, you are enough, be proud of who you are. Okay, so so we're gonna keep going here, and so she's having this experience. People keep asking me, what are you? And I would always answer, I'm an American. So every time she goes somewhere, she's always being asked that. I'm an American. No. What nationality? I'm an American, right? We're still kind of getting this, that American doesn't mean anything but white. And that's why they keep pushing that. I'm sure that you have run across that, or maybe know somebody who's had that experience. I know my children have had that experience as well, because my children, they don't look white, but they're, people aren't quite sure how to place them, so they get that often. What's so interesting is that when they were in Utah, people often assume that they were Mexican, and they would, ask about, what are you? Because they thought that they seemed a little too light to be Latinx, but they were like, I don't know, what are you? And then when we moved to the South, then people thought that they were Cuban. So that was kind of interesting. The people would say, what are you? And they would say, are you Cuban? And then when we moved to New England, they actually thought the children were Puerto Rican. So, which is really interesting, because you have a lot of movement back and forth between Puerto Rico and New York City, and the kind of the gateway to New England. So it's interesting how it changes depending on where you are in the country. Okay, so she's having that, and she just keeps insisting, right? I'm an American, but she keeps getting the message, and it's at this interpersonal level here as people are interacting with her. That's interpersonal, the individual. So this is Joyce. That's the individual. The interpersonal is somebody saying to her, what are you? Now, of course, it's tied to this societal and cultural here, right? Because we know that that these individuals, and at the interpersonal level, they didn't get that from nowhere, right? It keeps happening. It didn't come out of nowhere, right? They didn't just pull it out of the sky. These are ideas that they're getting from the societal level, right? It might be movies, books, magazines, TV shows, stories, narratives that we tell in our society, understandings. And so they are getting this message that American means white. It doesn't mean Asian. Okay, so that she keeps getting that. And that's where I was born. So she's like, I don't get why you don't get it. I was born here. I'm born here. So, but flashing hot inside. And when I tell them what they wanted to know. So she's understanding here at this interpersonal level. Message received. They want to know, what are you? She says, I'm an American, and they're not buying it. They're like, no, we have this image of what American means, and it means white, and you don't look white. And so what are you? And so then she goes ahead, and she knows what they're asking, so she gives it to him. She says, well, I'm Japanese. Oh, so now at the interpersonal level here, they are actually they are telling her, okay, you're Japanese. So for them, that triggers this whole network of ideas. Japanese, okay, and everything that they know about Japanese starts filling into their heads. Okay, I get it over with, so they could catalog and file me and pigeonhole me, so they know just how to think of me. So notice that it's become so routine to her. Every time she runs into somebody, they are saying to her, no, what are you? But she gets this a lot. And so she's used to it. And I know, having given birth to 6 children, I know that last month of my pregnancies, people would say that to me, no baby yet. And they would think they were the first one to say that. But I'd actually heard that probably 5, 6 times already that day. And so they think it's something new, unique, and original, but I keep getting it, right? So it made me a little crabby. And it's like, do you think there's a baby yet? You know, and because you could clearly see that I still couldn't see my shoes. So it would make me a little bit crabby. So you can kind of tell she's getting a little crabby because she's saying, I could get it over with, because she knows what's coming. And what does it mean to get it over with? So they could catalog and file me and pigeonhole me, right? So they're like, I'm gonna try to put you in a box. What are you? Okay, let me put you, Japanese. Let me put you in my Japanese box. Okay. And that box tells me everything that I want to know. So remember how we were talking about identities. And so then with our identities, then that's the box. And we're like, okay, well, I'm going to put you in this box. Okay. And then the problem with boxes is that it doesn't leave a lot of room for individuality, right? It's just kind of this generic image of Japanese, but you don't know that it is actually Joyce, not just any Japanese descent person, but this is Joyce. Okay. So again, we've got kind of these societal cultural, because this is like the idea of what Japanese is. And then at the individual level, you have actually Joyce. And so Joyce herself knows that they're doing that. So they know just how to think of me. And I would get that. Sometimes that would happen to me too. When I moved to New England, they would say, oh, you're from Alabama. And it brought all kinds of jokes and everything. They're like, oh, you all have wooden keys there. Nobody has their teeth. They had all kinds of ideas about Alabama. And so they would put me in the Alabama box. So I can really relate to that with her. And of course, they're so proud of themselves. They'd be guessing the difference between Japanese and Chinese. And certainly if you know or are or have close friends who have any experience with this, that in the United States, we do as at the societal cultural level, larger society, we don't necessarily look at if you are Asian American. It doesn't, we had that with the anti-Asian crime things. Maybe people are hearing things that are negative about China, and it doesn't matter, Korean, Vietnamese, whatever, that, and there'll be hate crimes against people. They don't necessarily look at which particular group people might be identifying with. So we do have that kind of globbing together and laminating over very, very different groups. There is actually no quote Asian, because these groups are very, very different. They have unique histories. And so that is something that in our society in the United States, we do laminate over that. Okay, now she says something here. They had me wishing that I'd been seeing, they had me wishing I was what I'd been seeing in the movies. Okay, now look at these categories here. Internalized, individual, interpersonal, societal, cultural, institutional. What do you think? They had me wishing I was what I'd been seeing in the movies. Okay. Did you say internalized? You're right if you did, because they had me wishing I was. So this is going on inside of her. And so what is she wishing that she was? She says, they had me wishing I was what I've been seeing in the movies and on TV and on billboards and in magazines. So over here, this is what the images are. Institutional just means that it's a pattern of it, like the media. The media is an institution. magazines, newspapers, those are all like institutions. But these institutions put out messages. So anything that it's cultural, it means it's an image, an idea of value, some sort of a privileging of this. So making movies, that's institutional because it's a practice. There's actually businesses, corporations like Sony, they make movies. That's institutional. Okay, that those are places of employment, places of work. They produce something, but they do more than just have a building or produce a CD or a movie that you can download and watch. The movies themselves have ideas, images, and things that they promote. So, maybe she saw, I forget what the young lady's name is on CNN. They have a lady who does a series. And so maybe Joyce is like, I wish I was as elegant as that reporter is. She goes all over the country and reports, and she has her own series on CNN. I wish I was her. Or maybe she's talking about, what do we see a lot of? You see like a lot of karate and martial arts sort of a thing. So she's like, so this is at the societal cultural level here, where it's like, well, oh, Asians are good at math, Asians are good at martial arts. And so she's like knowing that that's the box that they're putting her in, and she's internalizing that, and she's like, huh, I am Asian American, but I'm not very good at martial arts, but apparently I'm supposed to be, and so she's like measuring herself against that box. So they had me wishing I was. That's internalized. Are you seeing how to use these categories here? And that's internalized. What I'd been seeing in the movies and on TV, that's at this societal level here. So maybe let's say her friend says to her in class, gee, Joyce, how did you get an F on your math test? Asians are smart in math. Okay, well, that would be at this interpersonal level here, right? Because it's at the micro level. It's a conversation between two people, and the person is drawing on this cultural image of Asians are good at math. And Joyce, maybe if she's kind of like, man, yeah, you're right. I'm supposed to be a bad driver, but good at math and good at engineering. But I'm actually a good driver, and I'm not very good at math, right? So if she starts to feel bad about it, or even believe these sort of things and lose kind of her own individuality, those kind of battles inside of her are the internalized. How she's responding to and interacting with others, that's at the interpersonal level. At the societal level, those and cultural level, those are the images and ideas and values that are what fill up that box. Okay, and the institutional here, that is like practices, policies, institutions, businesses, that kind of thing. So testing is an institutional practice. It's bigger than our university. It's bigger than a classroom with a teacher. In fact, there's whole companies that make testing. So what they test is more that's at the societal cultural, because those are ideas and values. Do you see how it goes? Okay, so she's like kind of struggling with this about what the box of Asian is and what she is. People are always trying to jam her into a box, and she's like, I'm trying to be me, but people see me and then they're trying to interact with me in a particular way. So she says, so remember, she's always saying, well, I'm an American. Okay. while they were making laws in California against us owning land, we were trying to be American. Okay, so let me pause there. While they were making laws in California against us owning land. Okay, now what level is that going to be? Did you say institutional? Yes, you are right. It's institutional laws, because that's much bigger than the micro level of individuals, right? Individuals do participate in making the institutional. Yes, that's true. But laws are much bigger than even the person who sponsored the bill that became the law. So institutional is always these macro level things. So at this institutional level, they were making laws in California against us owning land. Okay, and that was similar in other parts of the country, right? And in Utah you have topaz, so you had policies, the property of Asian descent Americans were taken away when people were sent to the internment camps. That was all of that, putting people in these internment camps, that was at the institutional. The cultural part of that is that they were stigmatized as enemies of true Americans. Nobody said true, but they meant white Americans, because they weren't rounding up anybody but Asian Americans and putting them in internment camps. So the idea was that they were enemies, that they were dangerous, that they were potentially not patriotic Americans, even though many fought in the United States military for the United States. Okay, so that was the laws against them owning land. Now look at how the laws, the institutional, is going to affect people. If you cannot own land, then how land is about wealth. In the United States, owning land is about wealth. Wealth is different from income. With wealth, it's much bigger than income, right? And so having land and property ownership is a way to generate wealth that you pass down to your children. So if there's a law against it, if you keep the Asian American and Asian descent peoples from owning land, other people are going to have an advantage. You're keeping some excluded. That means there's more opportunities for those that are able to benefit, which would be mainstream white America, right? If we keep, you can't even try to buy it, I don't have to compete with you, then I have an advantage because you are disadvantaged. Every time you have a disadvantage, somebody's being advantaged. Okay, so this is very serious, that it was influencing families at this individual and interpersonal level, because you have the institutional level there. Okay, we were trying to be American, but of course they couldn't own land, right? Okay, there were laws against us intermarrying with white people. Okay, what is that? Use your categories here. There were laws against us intermarrying with white people. Okay, if you said institutional, you are correct. Are you starting to see how to do this? This is institutional. This is a structure. This is definitely a structure. There's laws against owning land. There's laws against marrying certain groups of people. So what are the consequences of these structures? They are sending a message here at the cultural level. This is a stigmatized group. Bad. Stay away from them, right? We don't want them marrying our people, which goes back to why it was called American means white, right? And so
sorry, could you say that again?
Sorry about that. This watch always, it scares me. Anyway, these things influence the interpersonal here. Okay, so laws. We were trying to be American, but of course, there's things being instituted that keep them from being American, right? Okay, when they put us in concentration camps, what is that one? That's going to be institutional as well, right? Because they are being, there's a policy. People don't have a choice about it. And even if they did, it's not just me as the neighbor saying, I think you all need to go into your, go over there to Topaz. No, it's much bigger than me. It's a policy that the government is putting out. So that's an institution. Everything you have policies, which would be laws, practices, traditions, policies, okay, institutions like policing, like any religions, any of these big systems, that's at the institution. The ideas, values, and images that they promote or send out, that's at the cultural level. Okay, so our people, we were trying to be American. So you see they're pushing back as these institutional things are keeping them minimized. Our people volunteered to fight against their own country, trying to be American when they dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We were still trying. Finally, we made it. Most of our parents fiercely dedicated to give us a good education, to give us everything they never had. We made it. Now they use us as an example to the Blacks and Browns, how we made it, how we overcame. Yes, 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 that is so true. If the Asians did it, why can't you? Right? Okay, so that's, even though the experiences are very different, like say with Latinx people, let's look at just with Mexico, which is different from Argentina, which is different from Puerto Rico and so on. But if you look just at Mexico, the border crossed many peoples, right? They were already living in the territories that cover the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And so the border crossed them, they never moved. But at the same time, you still have people who are coming in generations. Since the 1960s, we've had incoming immigration into the country at very, very high rates. So you've always got these new groups that have just arrived. And then you've got other families that have been here for generations. And then other families that never crossed the border crossed them. So you have these very complex groups, okay? So their experience is very different from the Asian descent peoples. And for a long time, the United States had policies on immigration where they only allowed the men to come in, and they were brought in to work on the railroads and things like this. So there were very different experiences. And then you think about African Americans and how there were 400 years of chattel slavery, okay, and then 100 years of Jim Crow. And so, that's most of the United States history, minus about, 70 some years of, quote, civil rights. But we still have people who have to run around in the streets and yell Black Lives Matter. Okay, so if you look at 400 years plus another 100 years of racial segregation in the Jim Crow, you got these big chunks of time where there was this violent exclusion of whole groups of people. So she's pointing something out here. Well, they're saying, well, just, try hard. Look at how they overcame. And you hear that a lot, just just work hard. If how did they overcome? You can do it too. You know, instead of looking at, well, what are the issues that are pushing some people out? Why are those issues there? You might see for women's history right now, you might see a commercial that they play, and the lady is somersaulting and vaulting up the down escalator, and she's very impressive and she's making it up. And you know, so we can say, good job, look at how she can go up the escalator even though the escalator is running down. But why does she have to do that? She did. So when, a lot of times if we're saying something about well, you know, if the Asians can do it, then why don't the Blacks and Latinos do it too? Well, first of all, the bottom of the ladder of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps started out very different. Those are different ladders and different experiences. And why is it that certain groups have to keep on, why do certain groups have to keep on going up the downhill escalator? I'll take off this watch because it keeps scaring me. So that's something to think about as you're thinking about exemplary teaching, is teachers do think that about that. These exemplary ones do. Okay, so we're almost done here. Okay, they use us as an example to the Blacks and Browns, how we made it, how we overcame. But there was always someone asking me, what are you? Now I answer, I'm an Asian. Remember, she used to always say, I'm an American. So now she says, I'm an Asian. And now they say, well, why do you want to separate yourself? Now I say, I'm Japanese. So she's actually doing what they were trying to get her to do before. And now that she does that, she's getting a different response. And they say, don't you know this is the greatest country in the world? Now I say, in America, I'm part of the third world people. And they say, if you don't like it here, why don't you go back? Which of course is ridiculous because she was born here. She can't go back. She's an American. And anytime that if you were born and raised in the United States, you know that no matter who you are going to have more in common with the people here because you were socialized in this country. And these two levels here, the societal, cultural, and the institutional, you were socialized into this. So whether you're African American, Asian American, American Indian, whatever it is, you're going to have, just like a fish in water, you're going to have taken that in. You go to another country outside of the United States, you're going to see how much you have in common with other people who were raised and socialized in the United States. So when we're in the United States, we're able to kind of see the details of you know, our different nuances of different groups. Like you know, people that know me, usually they can pick up that I wasn't born in Alabama. They can pick that up. Everywhere that I have lived since I've been 17 years old, people always ask me, well, where are you from? When I was in Utah, they used to ask me that every now and again too. Where are you from? Because there's certain vowels that I pronounce, and people know that I wasn't born in Utah. I wasn't born in Alabama. I wasn't born in Massachusetts. Where did I learn to say the vowels as I do? I learned it in Wisconsin because that's where I was socialized and learned to speak. So you hear kind of that French Canadian, the way that we say our vowels there. So because I've lived all over, though, it's somewhat muted, but people do say that. So we notice those kind of differences because we're from here. But if we go outside of the United States, then we will see how much we have in common with the people who were also socialized and raised in the United States. So the reason that I want you to understand these categories that I have here on this chart, and I want your analysis, in your case studies, in your final projects. I want you to use this because we're looking at how do structures influence what people do, don't do, what they, the decisions that they make. You think about, if you were Joyce's teacher and you just said to Joyce, well, just, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Well, actually, words do hurt me. They hurt the royal me too, right? Everybody. And so, because we're human beings. And so this is understanding these levels here. This is what the socio-political awareness is about. Joyce's mom here, my mom would say, don't worry about it. He who walks alone walks faster. Joyce's mom understands that socio-political awareness. So exemplary teachers, they know that they're working against these kind of ideas that American means white. So they're understanding how schooling has historically kept whole groups of people out. And so they're trying to use schooling to promote inclusion, to promote democratic participation. So they're trying to reverse those leaky trends. And the reason that they're successful is because they understand these kinds of levels of analysis. So to be able to understand Joyce here, if you did not have high levels of cultural competency, you might be one of these people who says, if you don't like it here, go back to Japan. Well, which makes no sense because she's not from Japan. She's actually from the United States. Okay, so but so you can see where a lot of disconnect goes. If you are a teacher that can understand this, you understand how Joyce is being positioned as an outsider. You can be that no matter how long her family's lived in the United States, she's always seen as a foreigner. And so as a teacher, exemplary teachers, they're working against that. Their teaching is geared toward, like, I understand that society is seeing you as a foreigner, so I'm going to make sure that what I do for you in the classroom, I'm working against that. So for example, if I know that at this societal cultural level that the box that we put Asian descent peoples in is always saying, well, they're good at math, I'm going to be working against that as Joyce's teacher. I'm going to be looking, I'm not going to presume that Joyce is good at math, or that Joyce wants to be an engineer, or that Joyce is going to be a bad driver, or that she's going to be great at martial arts. I'm going to be aware of that and work against that. I'm going to check in with Joyce. Does she need any kind of support in math? I'm not going to assume that she's going to be great at it. I'm going to pay attention to what her needs are instead of us putting her in that box and overlooking that, because my lens will tell me if I'm looking at Joyce or I'm looking at the box. So a lot of times, for example, you see these police shootings, and they do a lot of tests on police officers, and they see how often they will pull the trigger. And so they'll put up on the screen, they'll put up a white face, and then they'll put up a black face. And even the black officers will often pull the trigger faster and more frequently if the face is black. And so it's because we have been conditioned to associate black and not white with dangerous, maybe a little bit evil. Sometimes Asian descent peoples are categorized as a little sneaky and evil as well. You see that in movies and so on. And so we socialize, even if we don't believe it, it's in our culture, and we have to pay attention to not do it. So that's where you see a lot of times with these shootings that people are going on their gut reaction, what they've been socialized to do. They're not actually seeing Jamal. They're seeing the box of Black men. And that's what they're shooting, not the person, because they've been socialized to see that. So as a teacher, if I know that schooling has pushed whole groups of kids out, schools are supposed to be the great equalizers, but they've actually been a great inequity builder, then, and I didn't come in to be a dream wrecker. You know, they can do that all by themselves without me. I don't get paid enough money, for one thing. For another thing, I feel like it's morally wrong to be in and like, well, oh well, schools just wreck whole groups of people's dreams and smother the life and hope out of them. And no problem. That's the way it's been. It's going to keep going that way. So no, I came in because I enjoy learning. I enjoy children. I enjoy teachers. I enjoy people. So I think learning is powerful, and I believe in the power of education. So I came in to go the other way. And most teachers, I honestly believe most teachers have done that. They have come in to be dream keepers. They didn't come in because they think they're going to be rich. They came in and they're working under difficult conditions, especially during the pandemic. So they're doing it for very moral reasons, and they want to be dream keepers. So to be dream keepers, you have to understand what are the socio-political awareness, and to be able to do that. How do they do that? They know what's going on at these different levels. And then that's how they promote this high levels of cultural competency. Joyce can walk in both worlds. Joyce can walk in both worlds. She is an American, you know, and she can be proud of her heritage as a Japanese American. So why not, right? Just because she's proud of being Japanese American doesn't mean that she doesn't love America. You know, America has not always done wonderful things, but that doesn't mean that it isn't an amazing place to live and to be born and to be buried and all kinds of things, you know. So, and even the word America is problematic in the sense that, you know, from the top of Canada all the way to the tip of South America, these are all Americas, right? So America, if I say America, I could be talking about Mexico. I could be talking about Argentina, but I'm talking about the United States, and we usually presume that American means the United States, but actually, you know, Mexicans are American as well, you know. So this is where we have these issues with normalizing the United States as the only, and also as its whiteness as the normalness. But actually the United States has always been multicultural and multilingual. And so we need to bring those into the fold and not suggest that the only people who have done anything in the United States would be white men, which would not be true anyway. You cannot have history without women in it as well. You cannot have history without people of color in it. So it doesn't mean that we don't like, you know, men. It doesn't mean that we don't like certain groups of people. It just means that we're not over privileging one group and at the expense of other groups. So it's kind of a balancing effect. Okay, all righty. Hope you enjoyed that, and thank you so much for listening and learning. And remember, you are enough.